Verses 1 to 18. We have here, the date of this sermon which Moses preached to the people of Israel. A great auditory, no question, he had, as many as could crowd within hearing, and particularly all the elders and officers, the representatives of the people, and, probably, it was on the Sabbath day that he delivered this to them. 1. The place where they were now encamped was in the plain, in the land of Moab, v1, 5, where they were just ready to enter Canaan, and engage in a war with the Canaanites. Yet he discourses not to them concerning military affairs, the arts and stratagems of war, but concerning their duty to God, for, if they kept themselves in his fear and favor, he would secure to them the conquest of the land, their religion would be their best policy. 2. The time was near the end of the 40th year since they came out of Egypt. So long God had borne their manners, and they had borne their own iniquity, Number 14:34, and now that a new and more pleasant scene was to be introduced, as a token for good, Moses repeats the law to them. Thus, after God's controversy with them on account of the golden calf, the first and surest sign of God's being reconciled to them was the renewing of the tables. There is no better evidence and earnest of God's favor than his putting his law in our hearts, PS 147:19, 20. The discourse itself. In general, Moses spoke unto them all that the Lord had given him in commandment, v3, which intimates, not only that what he now delivered was for substance the same with what had formerly been commanded, but that it was what God now commanded him to repeat. He gave them this rehearsal and exhortation purely by divine direction. God appointed him to leave this legacy to the church. He begins his narrative with their removal from Mount Sinai, v6, and relates here, 1. The orders which God gave them to decamp, and proceed in their march, v6, 7. You have dwelt long enough in this mount. This was the mount that burned with fire, Hebrew 12:18, engendered to bondage, Gallan 4:24. Thither God brought them to humble them, and by the terrors of the law to prepare them for the land of promise. There he kept them about a year, and then told them they had dwelt long enough there, they must go forward. Though God brings his people into trouble and affliction, into spiritual trouble and affliction of mind, he knows when they have dwelt long enough in it, and will certainly find a time, the fittest time, to advance them from the terrors of the spirit of adoption. See Rom 8:15. 2. The prospect which he gave them of a happy and early settlement in Canaan, go to the land of the Canaanites, v7, enter and take possession, it is all your own. Behold, I have set the land before you, v8. When God commands us to go forward in our Christian course, he sets the heavenly Canaan before us for our encouragement. Moses here reminds them of the happy constitution of their government, which was such as might make them all safe and easy if it was not their own fault. When good laws were given them, good men were entrusted with the execution of them, which, as it was an instance of God's goodness to them, so it was of the care of Moses concerning them, and, it should seem, he mentions it here to recommend himself to them as a man that sincerely sought their welfare, and so to make way for what he was about to say to them, wherein he aimed at nothing but their good. In this part of his narrative he insinuates to them that he greatly rejoiced in the increase of their numbers. He owns the accomplishment of God's promise to Abraham, v10. You are as the stars of heaven for multitude, and prays for the further accomplishment of it, v11. God make you 1,000 times more. This prayer comes in a parenthesis, and a good prayer prudently put in cannot be impertinent in any discourse of divine things, nor will a pious ejaculation break the coherence, but rather strengthen and adorn it. But how greatly are his desires enlarged when he prays that they might be made 1,000 times more than they were. We are not straitened in the power and goodness of God, why should we be straitened in our own faith and hope, which ought to be as large as the promise? Larger they need not be. It is from the promise that Moses here takes the measures of his prayer, the Lord bless you as he hath promised you. And why might he not hope that they might become 1,000 times more than they were now, when they were now 10,000 times more than they were when they went down into Egypt, about 250 years ago? Observe, when they were under the government of Pharaoh, the increase of their numbers was envied, and complained of as a grievance, Ex 1:9, but now, under the government of Moses, it was rejoiced in, and prayed for as a blessing. The consideration of this might give them occasion to reflect with shame upon their own folly when they had talked of making a captain and returning to Egypt. That he was not ambitious of monopolizing the honor of the government, and ruling them himself alone, as an absolute monarch, v9. Though he was a man as well worthy of that honor, and as well qualified for the business, as ever any man was, yet he was desirous that others might be taken in as assistants to him in the business and consequently sharers with him in the honor. I cannot myself alone bear the burden, v12. Magistracy is a burden. Moses himself, though eminently gifted for it, found it lay heavily on his shoulders. Nay, the best magistrates complain most of the burden, and are most desirous of help, and most afraid of undertaking more than they can perform. That he was not desirous to prefer his own creatures, or such as should underhand have a dependence upon him, for he leaves it to the people to choose their own judges, to whom he would grant commissions, not durant bene placido to be turned out when he pleased, but quam dius bene gesserent to continue so long as they approved themselves faithful. Take you wise men, that are known to be so among your tribes, and I will make them rulers, v13. Thus the apostles directed the multitude to choose overseers of the poor, and then they ordained them. Acts 6:3, 6. He directs them to take wise men and understanding, whose personal merit would recommend them. The rise and origin of this nation were so late that none of them could pretend to antiquity of race, and nobility of birth, above their brethren, and, having all lately come out of slavery in Egypt, it is probable that one family was not much richer than another, so that their choice must be directed purely by the qualifications of wisdom, experience, and integrity. Choose those, says Moses, whose praise is in your tribes, and with all my heart I will make them rulers. We must not grudge that God's work be done by other hands than ours, provided it be done by good hands. That he was in this matter very willing to please the people, and, though he did not in anything aim at their applause, yet in a thing of this nature he would not act without their approbation. And they agreed to the proposal. The thing which thou hast spoken is good, v14. This he mentions to aggravate the sin of their mutinies and discontents after this, that the government they quarrelled with was what they themselves had consented to. Moses would have pleased them if they would have been pleased. That he aimed to edify them as well as to gratify them, for he appointed men of good characters, v15, wise men and men known, men that would be faithful to their trust and to the public interest. He gave them a good charge, v16, 17. Those that are advanced to honor must know that they are charged with business, and must give account another day of their charge. He charges them to be diligent and patient, hear the causes. Hear both sides, hear them fully, hear them carefully, for nature has provided us with 2 ears, and he that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame to him. The ear of the learner is necessary to the tongue of the learned, Isa 50:4. To be just and impartial, judge righteously. Judgment must be given according to the merits of the cause, without regard to the quality of the parties. The natives must not be suffered to abuse the strangers any more than the strangers to insult the natives or to encroach upon them. The great must not be suffered to oppress the small, nor to crush them, any more than the small, to rob the great, or to affront them. No faces must be known in judgment, but unbribed unbiased equity must always pass sentence. To be resolute and courageous, you shall not be afraid of the face of man, be not overawed to do an ill thing, either by the clamors of the crowd or by the menaces of those that have power in their hands. And he gave them a good reason to enforce this charge, for the judgment is God's. You are God's vicegerents, you act for him, and therefore must act like him, you are his representatives, but if you judge unrighteously, you misrepresent him. The judgment is his, and therefore he will protect you in doing right, and will certainly call you to account if you do wrong. He allowed them to bring all difficult cases to him, and he would always be ready to hear and determine, and to make both the judges and the people easy. Happy art thou, O Israel! In such praise as Moses was.